Morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to this licensing committee. This is being live streamed. Should we hit any technical issues, the meeting will be paused until the technical issues are resolved. We now move on to the agenda. Do we have any apologies or substitutions?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from councillors Sharp and Austin.
Thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest? Thank you. Are you happy for me to confirm the minutes as a true record? Super. I have no announcements to make other than to wish you all a very happy Christmas and a Merry New Year. And now we move on to agenda item number 5, which is the consultation for CCTV and taxis. And I'll pass you over to Stuart Broom.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, we're here today for members to consider a consultation on CCTV in vehicles as set out in the Department for Transport Statutory Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Standards document. The background to this is that in July 2020, the DFT published its statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards with a strong focus to protect all passengers and users of taxis and private hire transport services. Statutory guidance makes it clear that the government expects the recommendations contained within it to be implemented unless there are compelling reasons not to. And to this end, excuse me, to this end, the Council implemented a large number of these measures in 2020. The statutory guidance also states all licensing authorities should consult to identify if there are local circumstances which indicate that the installation of CCTV in vehicles would have either a positive or an adverse net effect on the safety of taxi and private hire vehicle users, including children and vulnerable adults, and taking into account potential privacy issues. So that's the background of why we're going to be running this consultation. Paragraph 4, the summary here. So essentially, as we all know, taxi drivers conduct a lot of different types of work. They do things like school run services, transports for children and vulnerable adults with special needs, etc. They do airport travel, corporate travel, as well as, I suppose, the mainstay of things like hospitality trips and things like that for people to go out on an evening, and more importantly, I suppose, get them home at the end of the evening. So, we're quite late coming to the table as such with this CCTV consultation. Other authorities across the country have already considered it, and paragraph 4.2 points out some reasons as in their decision making. So it's things like taxi-related crimes, so ranging from sort of fare dodging to assaults. That can be assaults on passengers, but also assaults on drivers. Leaving vehicles without paying, verbal and racial abuse, and other illegal activities such as drug running and any sort of disputes over fares, etc. So they're in 4.2. 4.3 just sort of detail some other reasons for the introduction of compulsory CCTV in other areas of the country. So the deterring factor of deterring taxi and private hire drivers from abusing or exploiting children and vulnerable adults, protecting taxi and PHV drivers when false or malicious allegations are made against them, reducing the fear of crime in passengers and drivers, giving public confidence essentially that they're safe to use, and deterring things like hate crime, etc. Paragraph 4.4, following issues were also raised regarding proportionality and privacy considerations. In-vehicle CCTV systems being an invasion of privacy by passengers or drivers, potential for misuse of the information recorded by the in-vehicle CCTVs, ability for them to be hacked, or the security of the actual individual CCTV systems, and the consistency of how they record, and compliance with other laws that are out there regarding privacy. Now in 4.5 of the report, the number of complaints and allegations reported to the Council's licensing authority relating to factors falling within 1 to 10 that I just went through, numbered in the report, are very low. As a result of this, the council's current position for in-vehicle CCTV in taxis and private hire vehicles is to allow it to be used providing they comply with the conditions as set out in the local policy, which essentially includes observing human rights laws, privacy laws, as set out in the Information Commissioner's Office guidelines. And because of this, the licence holder remains the data controller and processor of that information that they collect. So the DFT statutory guidance states that we should consult, and whilst it's not worded as we must consult, it has been interpreted by officers that unless there are good reasons not to consult on the possible adverse or net positive impacts from compulsory CCTV, the licensing authority should at this point consult key stakeholders. Now, there are inevitably legal and cost implications. If a blanket approach to CCTV is introduced requiring all taxis and private hire vehicles to install CCTV, we would become, as in the council, would become the data controller for the data in each and every licensed vehicle and would be held liable for any breach of data protection by the driver or operator, which importantly we don't employ. We license them, but we're not an employer in that way. So it's quite a unique setup. And this would inevitably mean increased costs to the council in administration and monitoring compliance, with increased checks needing to be made to make sure that the systems are fitted, that they are working correctly and everything is being done lawfully. Obviously, that would be required to lower our exposure to potential repercussions. Any increased expenditure in administration and enforcement would be passed on to the Hackney Carriage and private hire trade by way of their fees. That's how it works, as we all know from when I do my fees review report to you. In addition to increased costs to the council, there would be increased costs to the trade themselves, as it is estimated that suitable CCTV system would be in the region of £500 to £1,000, dependent really on how many, I suppose, they're buying and the economies of scale, etc. And there would also be ongoing maintenance costs because whenever a vehicle was changed because it came to the end of its life or had an accident, the drivers would need to move the CCTV into the new vehicle, or if there were faults, they would have to get a replacement. And whilst they were not having CCTV and they wouldn't be able to use their vehicles because they'd be suspended because they would be in breach of their license conditions if it became a condition of their license. So that would obviously result in a loss of income to them. So the end user is likely to face increased sort of costs in using the taxi trade because those costs are inevitably going to be passed down to the end user. And it would require reviewing from time to time to ensure that it is still considered necessary. And whilst this could be sort of run alongside of policy reviews that we do for the taxi licensing policy, there is still likely to sort of be an additional cost to the authority at that point as well. So Appendix 1 is the consultation document. Appendix 2 is the consultation questions specifically to licence holders. And then Appendix 3 are consultation questions specifically to members of the public, obviously just to reflect the necessary wording change from the angles that we're coming at. So that's the end of my report. Obviously, I'm available to answer questions.
Councillor Ambrose, thank you, Stuart. Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you. I may have missed something in the papers. You note that it's the responsibility of the licence holder to control it. Are there regulations in force that they must keep the images for, say, 30 days or something? I was just thinking in terms of allegations of rape or child exploitation, that sort of thing, or is it, they wipe it the next day or something?
So at the moment, because the CCTV is voluntary, the only conditions they have to comply with is that the cameras are all sort of upward facing, so they face the person's face, and they're not. So essentially, so they're at dashboard level and they're not down in footwells, etc., to sort of, to take advantage in the kind of upskirting way and things like this, which we all hear about in the papers. So there's only conditions about where they're positioned, not what they have to how long they keep them for, etc. If we go with this consultation, what will happen is, following obviously the consultation exercise, it will come back to members with the consultation responses. And at that point in time, if it was considered that CCTV was going to be something we wanted to pursue as a council, then obviously we would put together conditions, and I would consult with Victoria, our data protection officer, to ensure that the conditions complied with the ICO rules and human rights legislation, etc. And we would look at what other authorities around the country have done with their CCTV compulsory policies. And those conditions would come back, and they would more than likely have in there the length of time that recordings would have to be kept. But more importantly, the systems would be encrypted, and they would only be able to actually be accessed by a terminal either at the council or the police, and it will more than likely be at the council.
Thank you. So Harries.
I think my questions probably almost been answered. I note that in paragraph 6.1, you say that if the council mandates a blanket approach to CCTV, then you will need to define the type of systems that are to be used, and also manage storage, obviously in compliance with GDPR and other relevant regulations. So in a sense, that answers the key question: what regulations would data be collected in compliance with? How would it be stored? How long would it be stored? Is audio to be stored as well as video? Presumably yes. But the interesting question really is, what if there is an intermediate kind of position where the council feels that it does not need to mandate an absolutely consistent approach, because this may be seen as oppressive by the trade, in which case the trade would be told, I presume, that you must arrange for suitable equipment that fits within defined specifications, which I imagine you would provide. And then you have areas of ambiguity as to how this is to be stored. And we know, for example, that there is growing controversy over Microsoft because they've decided not to sequester data in European data centers anymore, which is leading to a massive spat there. And it worries me that we might be opening a can of worms here that could lead to some form of legal challenge on the grounds of being oppressive or ambiguous or unclear. My feelings about this are that there is this truism that anything that can be digitized will be digitized in the end, but there's also a growing sense that anything that can be surveilled will be surveilled in the end. And I have no issues with actually carrying out the consultations, but I do want to register grave skepticism as to whether we would actually want to go ahead with imposing this on the trade. That's all, just for the record.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Do you want to respond, Stuart?
I would just say on that really that, like I say, at this committee today, well, obviously, as you just pointed out, we're looking at whether the questions and the document that's going to go out to consultation is sufficient, whether there was any additional questions that members wish to ask the consultees and stakeholders. The concerns that you just raised, Councillor, would be obviously discussed when those responses come back. And as far as just from an anecdotal point of view, my understanding of the systems that are already out there is, if there are no incidents, what happens after 31 days or whenever the recording capacity is expunged, it will overwrite, and it will just, and we will not see any of that data, and the driver will not see any of that data. But should a complaint come in, then that triggers you to bring the driver in with the vehicle to then use your encrypted sort of storage device to pull that information, which is then stored locally within the council until that investigation is resolved, and then it's deleted.
That's 30 days. 30 days to make a complaint. After 30 days, you can't call evidence for your complaint. So presumably one will make it clear to passengers that if you have a complaint, you have from 30 days to do that.
It would be made clear to people on our website, and it runs in line with generally what most public houses have with their CCTV systems. When the police require those conditions, if something happens in a pub, we have 31 days to investigate it and obtain that information, and then it's overwritten. And it's kind of an industry standard to be around about 31 days.
Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Inskip.
Can you tell me what other local authorities have already got CCTV as compulsory? Have we got, do we know how many? I mean, you've mentioned that some are in the process of consulting like we are, but has anybody actually got it up and running? And are we expecting that most local authorities will introduce it, or are we expecting that only certain areas in city centres will introduce it? That's the first question. I've got another question afterwards.
In answer to that, I don't have a definitive list, I'm afraid, at this committee. I would have had that at the next committee, to sort of feed that information back. Again, anecdotally, certainly I can tell you that Rotherham has got CCTV. It was mandated off the back of the obviously the sexual exploitation issues they've had. I believe Milton Keynes have also got it, and a number of other large cities around the UK have got it, and I believe certainly sort of inside London, a lot of the vehicles down there are mandated to have it. So it's certainly growing in areas, but it's not everywhere. But there are more and more councils obviously are running this consultation exercise to obtain the data to see whether it's a proportional response at this point. So, but certainly when I come back at the next committee with all of the responses, I will have a fuller list of authorities that do have it.
And could I follow it up with, if a taxi driver has already got CCTV, it's likely not to be the system that we would want. So are we going to ask them to take out their existing CCTV and put in the system we require? Or are we able to deal with other forms of CCTV that they may be already installed in vehicles?
Okay, so at the moment, as I say, they have these conditions they have to comply with, and one of those is they have to tell us that they've got it. I'm not aware of anyone who's told us they've got it. I would imagine that most systems, if they were out there, would be more than likely dash cam systems, to protect them in case of accidents, as opposed to inward facing cameras for their passengers and driver safety. And as I say, we haven't got anybody officially registered as saying they have it. If we do have people who come to us saying, well, I've already got this system, if it doesn't comply with the standard system that we end up using, then they will have to remove it, and the conditions will be changed within the policy to state that the CCTV system will be one that is on the list that we say is suitable. And there are a number of providers that offer these, properly professionally encrypted systems that we would need to be using, and they're not going to be, unfortunately, the sort of thing you could buy off the shelf from Halfords, for argument's sake. They will be a specialist system, and the others will be removed.
Councillor Inskip.
Yeah. So first of all, so I know locally Cambridge has also decided, I think in October, to go down that route, and I think South Cambs have as well. With South Cambs, I believe my understanding is that they've, I think they've effectively exempted what the executive hire category. I'm just wondering, given that they have done that, and I haven't delved into the details on that, I wonder whether on question 10 for the public, whether we ought to maybe call out that category separately. So they've, because at the moment we've just got Hackney carriage and private hire, and I can't remember the technical term for the the executive
Yeah.
hire one, but yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
kind of chauffeur pass.
That's the one, yeah, yeah.
Executive hire.
Yeah.
I can certainly add that in.
Yeah. And then the other question I've got is obviously with the survey for the taxi trade, we know who they are and we know how to make them aware of what we're doing. What are we planning to do to try and get as much input from the public as possible? Because to be honest, I've no idea how people feel about this. So I think it's really important that we try and get as broader input on the consultation as possible.
Yeah, so we work with the council has a consultee sort of list where members of the public are registered to say that they wish to be informed of whether it's transportation or environmental or planning. So we use that spreadsheet to send out to members of the public. We will also obviously be going to other stakeholders such as disability groups, etc. In the area. Obviously, all of our licensed operators and drivers and Hackney proprietors, so they will also be involved, and we will be going to parish and ward councillors as well to spread the word. So it will be on our website. And there'll be the usual notice placed on the notice board in reception as well. So it will be as wide as we can possibly sort of get it. I'm not sure whether we can get it onto our Facebook page. I don't know whether that's possible, but certainly we'll do our best like we do with all of the other policies that we consult on.
Yeah, I think particularly on the Facebook page one, that's probably, I suspect, more people look at that than any of those other things that you talked about. So I think it'd be good if we could do that. Yeah.
We can get it on.
It might be, sorry to interrupt, it might be an idea to actually get comms to do a piece on it, because I think personally that I'm very interested to see what the public think about this, as well as the trade, because at the end of the day, it's our job to make sure that the travelling public remains safe, as well as safeguarding the taxi drivers. But it is important that we keep the public safe. So I will come to you.
I was just going to say that when Stuart contacts the parish councils, we could ask the parish councils to make sure it goes on their Facebook pages as well. Yeah. They have the ability, so if we talk to comms about what they social media tweet or post, then actually that could be something that can easily be replicated. So it is dealt with at a very local level.
Chair, if I could also add as well, if again, anecdotal sort of evidence is anything to go on, this is something that local papers tend to pick up on. It's quite an emotive, CCTV introduced at council, etc. So I imagine it will be very well responded to.
Yeah. Councillor Jones, sorry to steal your thunder.
I wasn't waving it at you. I knew you'd taken it. Thank you. One of the approaches, or the way it looks, is obviously you've taken an all or nothing approach, and without saying a punitive way, but where we have had licensing subcommittees and we have looked at taxi drivers and their behaviour, would it be possible to introduce it, maybe not as a compulsory one, as a punitive one, but because I hope we would have filtered those types of characters out, but where there are concerns or where there have been multiple breaches of behaviour or seem to have come to light, is it possible to introduce a slightly more sort of suggested introduction of it, and would that leave us open to being the compulsory ICO information officer if we did that? That makes sense.
Yeah, I believe I understand what you're saying. The thing is that the CCTV will be a condition of a license, not the driver. So vehicles are used by multiple drivers. So if we had a driver in a committee where there were concerns about fit and proper status, I think the decision would have to be made, not saying, well, we're not quite sure about your character, so we're going to make you have to have a car which has got CCTV, so Big Brother's watching you. I don't think that's a message we want to really be sending out with it. And secondly, as I say, with some of our big operators, the CCTV would go in a vehicle, and that vehicle is driven by multiple drivers. So, I can certainly see that there would be merits in, like some authorities have done, where they have said, right, immediate public hire vehicles for Hackney Carriage, ones with a roof light sitting on ranks where they don't have to have booking records maintained. There is a good cause and reason to have CCTV put into those vehicles. But where you've got the executive hire, as Councillor Inskip mentioned, you know, where obviously they're pre-booked, they're all on account, you know, and that side of things, but and obviously usually a higher standard of vehicle, that would be perhaps excessive to put them into those sorts of vehicles, and possibly even into standard private hire vehicles where it is pre-booked and there are booking records, you know, that are maintained for up to 18 months that we can get hold of, you know, that side of things. So there are possible ways of looking at it, but I certainly would steer clear of putting it down as making it as a condition of somebody, you know, on the grounds of fit and proper. I think that, and we would become the data controller for any vehicle that he was in as well, which brings a whole new level of issues, because we wouldn't know necessarily what vehicle he's in, you know, in that way.
Taxi drive users tend to be rather distinctive from the general population. I mean, I virtually never use a taxi, but other people, like, I mean, if Sue here, she uses them a lot. So I think when we're asking the CC's questionnaire to the public, we've got to be, you know, aiming our questionnaire not at the general population, but specific, well, certainly specifically at people who do use taxis. And I wonder whether we should have a question saying, do you regularly use a taxi, which would be quite important, so you get a different point of view, someone not using a taxi and just thinks it'd be a good idea. And and the other thing is, perhaps the public questionnaires could be given out to taxi drivers to distribute to their customers if they would feel that would be helpful, so that they get a wider representation.
As far as the question, I can certainly, you know, add that question in along the lines of, you know, how often would you use taxis? You know, once a week, once a month, and something like that. I can certainly put a question in that tries to quantify the level of use that a person, you know, actually does utilise the service of taxis.
It does say, would you use taxis more if CCTV was made?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're not using it at all, then that's fully relevant, isn't it?
Yeah. No, again, you know, if members wish for that, I have no problem in putting a question in along those lines. Certainly, so I'll just make a note of that. Yeah. Okay.
As far as distribution goes.
As far as distribution, it's a bit like a horse to water or whatever, and you know, we could certainly you know, print a load of paper and put it into the operators and ask them to do it. Whether or not we would, you know, or they would, you know, distribute them out, and whether those people would actually take the time to, you know, to fill them out is the difficulty in that, and it may just be a waste of resources, you know, but I think personally, I think with the fact that I've got no doubt this will go in the papers, I think, you know, it certainly has most other places where they've looked to introduce it, because it is such a you know, a hot topic as such, with safeguarding and that side of things. With that and the Facebook postings, which a lot of people use, and going out to the parish councils and using our consultation list that is quite extensive, I think that, you know, we should be able to get a reasonable response, and especially with the user groups as well, because we've been working with Liz with, you know, some of the disability groups,
and are these forms going out online so people can fill them up on?
Yeah, it will be available online, you know, and then it'll all be collated. But if somebody does get hold of the downloadable one and sends it in paper, we'll accept them as well.
Miss.
I was just,
Oh,
sorry, I just really want to add, what we could also do is make sure that they are available in the library in paper format for those people who don't have the opportunity to respond to them digitally as well. So we can make sure, because libraries are now being used very much as hubs as well. So that would be, yeah.
Yes,
so that
and
would be
warm hubs, doctor
warm hubs,
surgeries.
and yeah,
Yeah.
I think
The reception.
we need to make
Yeah.
sure that it gets to those people who don't have the ability to respond to an online form.
Member Smith.
Just a couple of points, really. Should this come to be decided that we would encourage the use of these, I think we would need to emphasise that proper training would be given to anybody likely to be driving a taxi with one of these devices installed, because if you don't know how to use it, it's worse than useless. This will be a considerable investment for small businesses, won't it? And again, if they are encouraged to use an approved device, then training must be key. And I would think that this training should sit with perhaps an organisations or an authority such as ourselves. During my past career, I was in charge of daily monitoring and retrieving of CCTV images. And it's not easy. You have to know what you're doing. So I think training would be key. Thank you.
Any other questions from any other councillors? Councillor Harries.
Just on the questions for the public, I noticed you have several questions about have you decided not to use a taxi because of the absence of compulsory CCTV and so on. Is there any merit in actually putting a question, are you less likely to use a taxi if you know that your images are going to be recorded? Is that frivolous? That there is a class of people out there who are absolutely allergic to being captured on film without their consent. So it's just a thought, but it may be a silly thought.
I don't think there's any such thing as a silly question that if it affects a particular category of people, then it's something that maybe we need to consider.
I think also, Chair, that it ties into the whole reason for the consultation, which is the net sort of positive or adverse effect. And asking a question like that, I think there is merit in asking that.
Being captured on CCTV, though, is really a day-to-day thing that we all live with. You can't walk down a street, some streets, go into a bank, a shop, an office in many cases, possibly even a pub or a restaurant. These devices are far and wide. And I think as long as there is clear signage that, these devices are being used and that the information gathered will be securely and properly dealt with, then I suppose there could always be a clause that if you have some health condition, you could request that the CCTV in the taxi isn't used. But on the other hand, then that's wide open for misuse.
I think these are all very good questions, but things that need to be discussed when we've got the consultation responses. I'm not sure that's necessarily anything that we're looking at today, which is, are we going to go out for consultation? We need to hear from the public. We need to hear from the trade to find out how they feel about it, so we can then weigh up the merits or lack of in compulsory CCTV in taxis. I mean, I've sat on subcommittees now for nearly 8 years, and I can only think of maybe 2 occasions where CCTV would have been really useful because it was their word versus somebody else's. I would also say if somebody's going to make a complaint, they do it almost immediately. They don't wait 30 days. If they're that upset, they will be straight on the phone the next day or that day to say, I've had a really bad experience and I'd like to do something about it. So in terms of keeping data, I don't think that's an issue. I'm sure I have taken many taxis back from Cambridge since last October where I have been recorded. I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't informed, I don't think, when I got in the taxi that I was being recorded. But, I'm personally a believer, if you're not doing anything wrong, then I don't mind being recorded. Probably not looking at my best at 2 o'clock in the morning, but not to worry. Anyway, so any more questions for Stuart? So are we happy to move to the vote then, that we're happy for this item to go out to consultation to the public and the trade, and we're going to endeavour to make as much of this available to the people who would probably use taxis most, which would be the elderly, who don't have access to social media, to make sure that we can get the responses from them, because they're key as well, I believe. So unless I have any dissensions, I'm assuming that's unanimous. Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Okay, this will be nice and short for everybody. Essentially, since we last met a month ago, the animal welfare prosecution continues, and we look as if we will be in a position to progress that as we want to by the deadline. So that's all working well. Obviously, I can't go into details about that. And then the other thing is we mentioned about getting an additional resource into the department, and we were successful in our application to get a 16-hour post, and we're hopeful that we may be able to fill that by sort of middle of January. And it's a fixed-term contract for 6 months. Which will give us the breathing space we need to absorb the work that's starting to come in, whilst we look at the sort of future structure of the department. But other than that, there really isn't much to tell you at this point.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm looking ahead at the forward agenda. There's nothing on the agenda for January. I'm minded at this stage, unless something urgent comes up, to cancel that meeting. If everybody's happy with that? Well, I've got you all here. So if we cancel January's, and we'll have a look at February's, see if anything exciting comes forward.
When's the consultation?
The consultation does end until the beginning of March. So we've got a little bit of leeway yet before we do anything. So in that case, then at 10:37, I will bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much for coming.